Several points I would like to make. One of them is about the question. Actually, that question came to me during the break about the degree of preciseness of the idea of the pole of objectivity, which Husserl offers us the object of possible proper knowledge. Okay. You know, this is about the particular something which always turn out to be identifiable in reference to the essence. Okay? Now, it implies actually a synthesis of, as we have said, a synthesis of all these noemata, so to speak, all these givings of that very same of the object into the intentionality. Okay, so I mean, in all these different modalities of intentionality, okay, you turn out to be identify the object as the same in reference to the essence. Okay, however, in each and every act of intentionality, the object gives itself away to your understanding or consciousness with its different sets of aspects. Okay? In other words, the coffee that I love and the coffee that I remember are not the same. Okay? But coffee here turns out to be still identifiable as the same in both of the experiences. Okay? But this means that pole of objectivity can never be a complete pole. Okay? So the objectivity can never be a completed, enclosed something. Okay? It means that each and every future possible acts of intentionality should be accepted as an occasion, potential occasion, for the opening up of a new aspect of that very same object. Okay? Now, this brings us to the rather problematic relation of the question of the, actually this is a very big problem. I'm going to try to reduce it in its importance. Okay, the relationship between actuality and potentiality. Okay. Now, there are different thinkers interpreting this relationship in other different ways, okay? But somehow, it turns out to be almost impossible to separate them two. Şimdi, what do we mean by actuality? First, it's then easier relative to the other one in this couple of concepts, okay? Actuality is nothing then, or refers nothing else than that which really, for the time being, right now, here, actualizing itself. Here and now. Okay? Actualizing itself. Or if you like, happening. Okay? So, for instance, an act of intentionality which actualizes itself means that that act of intentionality is taking place. Okay? Here and now. Right now. Okay? Is taking place. So, an intentionality, a certain intentionality, has been actualized. Okay? Now, I am stretching my hand and holding this bottle flask of water. Okay? Now, this has been actualized. My holding of that something has been actualized. Okay? Now, I am standing here, though, and I have hands, and this is something tactile, okay, which I can touch. But not doing it right now, okay, then my touching it remains as a potentiality. You got it? Now, you can easily say that the potentiality presents itself here in this relationship as a part of existence. You know, even though I did not touch it, okay, I did not touch it, I might have been. Okay? But I didn't do that, so it has not been actualized. it remains at a potential. Why? Because there was a possibility of my doing this. Okay? But don't forget, the possibility of my doing this, saying that there is such a possibility, does not mean that that possibility may someday could be realized. It may forever remain, if you like, unactualized. In other words, I may never ever touch this something. Okay? So, for instance, one line of thinkers, for example, Aristotle, takes actuality as not being a part of being. In other words, potentiality is that possibility which does not take place in existence. Okay? But according to some other thinkers, the potentiality is that very aspect of the thing that the development of the thing evolves itself towards. For instance, take the Hegelian thinking, okay? Who says that becoming an oak tree is always embedded in the form of the seed as a potentiality. You know, what do I have right now in my hand is nothing else than a corn or a seed. Okay? The oak tree is not here, but lays as a potential within that seed. Okay? So the seed, given the chance, would necessarily evolve itself, okay, into becoming an oak tree. In other words, realizing its own potentiality. Now, as you may remember perhaps, this was one of the important problems in Marxist thinking as well, Marxian thinking as well. You know, realizing the human potentials, the requirement of realizing the human potentials turn out to be one of the basic main reasons why a communist society turns out to be desirable. Because it allows this possibility to be actualized. Okay? So, it's a very difficult couple of concepts. Now here, Husserl says that while through certain acts of intentionalities we actualize, okay, some other act of intentionalities turns out to be delineated, pre-delineated, began to be formed, if you like, began to be formed at the horizon. When I direct the attention of my intentionality onto them, they might have been realized. Therefore, turning into, assuming the form of actuality rather than remaining potentiality. Okay? So the horizon then, what horizon I am talking about right here? The horizon of the synthesis of the unity of consecutive acts of intentionalities, which we call consciousness. Okay? Which means that all these potentialities, as long as remain as potentialities, which never actualized by the intending consciousness, okay, remains in the rather dim light of the horizon. Okay? And each new act of intentionality actualized, okay, creates a change in the horizon. Just like a walking man. Okay, in the case of a walking man. When I walk, you know, my horizon is continuously changing, never remaining the same. Okay? And establishing a scope of the surrounding world. Okay? Now, this means that the possibility of the world can never be consumed away, but a certain region in it, okay, through the actualized acts of intentionalities can brought into the light, okay, while through the potentially remaining possible acts of intentionalities, a certain horizon displays itself before our gaze. Okay? Now, this certain horizon is the horizon of the possible potential acts of intentionalities. Now, as you can see, this sets itself as a region, which we are going to call as the region of being. Okay? A big question. Actually, we are going to return back to this issue when we begin to discuss the Heideggerian contributions. And I intend to close this section by reading you how Husserl elaborates this phenomenological experience. So I'm going to keep you here about some 5 minutes more. I am sorry for those who had to catch bus. Come on, students do not take bus, right? Only the employees in the university. Okay, try to listen carefully and understand what's going on. And at the moment you fall short of understanding, do not hesitate to interrupt me. Okay? Before that, let me give you the name of the analysis of the other part. Noematics in relation to noetics. The analysis of the modes, or if you like, modalities of intentionality. Okay? They display as well an independent structure of the absolute objectivity, as I said, in the very heart of absolute subjectivity. Okay? Okay, I'm reading now. Inquiry into consciousness concerns two sides. We have talked about it. They can be characterized descriptively as belonging together inseparably. So, we are analyzing them as if two different elements of the analysis, but they are actually together there in this synthetic unity of consciousness. Okay? The sort of combination uniting consciousness with consciousness can be characterized as synthesis, a mode of combination exclusively peculiar to consciousness. For example, if I take the perceiving of this die, Zar, okay, this die as the theme of my description, I see in pure reflection that this die is given continuously as an objectivity in a multiform and changeable multiplicity of manners of appearing, which belong determinately to it. These, in their temporal flow, the appearings of the dice, okay, these, in their temporal flow, are not an incoherent sequence of subjective processes. Rather, they flow away in the unity of a synthesis such that in them one and the same is intended as appearing. The one identical die appears now in near appearances, now in far appearances, in the changing modes of here and there, over against and always co-intended. Though perhaps unheeded, absolute here in my co-appearing organism. Furthermore, each continued manner of appearance in such a mode, for example, the die here in the near sphere, shows itself to be in turn the synthetic unity pertaining to a multiplicity of manners of appearance belonging to that mode. So actually now the synthetic unity of die appearing belonging to that particular mode, okay, we are talking about. Thus the near thing as the same appears now from this side, now from that, okay. And if visual perspectives change also, however, the other manners of appearance, tactual, acoustic, and so forth, as we can observe by turning our attention in that right direction, always we find the future in question as a unity belonging to a flow of multiplicities. Okay? Looking straightforwardly, we have perhaps the one unchanging shape or color. In the reflective attitude, we have its manners of appearance, orientational, perspectival, and so forth, following one another in continuous sequence. Furthermore, each of these manners of appearance, for example, the shadowing forth of the shape or color, is itself an exhibition of. This term is important here. It exhibits itself, in other words. Okay? Exhibition of the shape, the color, or whatever the feature is that appears in it. Thus, each passing cogito, thinking, intending, intends its cogitatum, that which is thought, okay, not with an undifferentiated blankness, but as a cogito with a describable structure of multiple. If that was not describable, Husserl perhaps wouldn't be able to claim to find out a solid ground upon which we can base our true knowledge. Okay? A structure having a quite definite noetic, noematic composition, okay, which by virtue of its essential nature pertains to just this identical cogitatum. Okay? If we consider the fundamental form of synthesis, namely identification, okay, we encounter it first of all as an all-ruling, passively flowing synthesis in the form of the continuous consciousness of internal time. So actually, those of intentions are themselves temporal, and when we are talking about the unity of consciousness, we are the consecutive sequences of acts of consciousnesses to which now Husserl refers to internal time, flow of the internal time. Okay? Every subjective process has its internal temporality. Okay? If it's a conscious process in which a worldly object appears as cogitatum, then we have to distinguish the objective temporality that appears. For example, the temporality of this die from the internal temporality of the appearing. For example, that of the die perceiving. You follow? Now, what he talks about objective temporality is that which temporality belonging to the die of the consciousness, not the actual die, that die which appears in the consciousness. And second, he talks about internal temporality in reference to the act of perceiving that appearing. Okay? So, he said that one has to distinguish between these two. Okay? This appearing flows away with its temporal extents and phases, which for their part are continually changing appearances of the one identical die. Their unity is a unity of synthesis, not merely a continuous connectedness of cogitationes, as it were, a being stuck to one another externally, but a connectedness that makes the unity of one consciousness. Now the same die, the same for consciousness, can be intended in highly diverse modes of consciousness, simultaneously or else successively in separated modes of consciousness. For example, in separate perceptions, recollections, expectations, valuations, and so forth. Again, it's a synthesis that, as a unitary consciousness, embracing these separated processes gives rise to the consciousness of identity, and thereby makes any knowing of identity possible. That's important. Therefore, knowing identity of that which immediately gives itself has been declared as possible for consciousness. Okay? no longer you are stuck in the impossibility of knowledge à la Kant. That's, from Husserl's own point of view, was a huge step in the way to establish solid knowledge, okay? Synthesis, however, let me read a few lines more, then I'll set you free. Synthesis, however, does not occur just in every particular conscious process, nor does it connect one particular conscious process with another only occasionally. On the contrary, the whole of conscious life is unified synthetically. Okay? Therefore, we are going to talk about the horizons, actually. Okay? Conscious life is therefore an all-embracing cogito, the fundamental form of this universal synthesis, the form that makes all other synthesis of consciousness possible, is the all-embracing consciousness of the internal time. Now, there are two things here, okay? First of all unity or synthesis of all-embracing consciousness on the one hand, okay? And on the other hand, that synthesis is based upon temporality, not spatiality. Okay, that is one of the most crucial steps taken. Okay, from then on, we begin to think in terms of, or we are going to try to think in terms of temporalities rather than spatialities. You know, our major instrument for analogy is establishing spatial relations between things. You know, the Freudian topographic, later on structural model, etc., etc. All, or are almost an overwhelming majority of mode of explanation has been determined by space. We try to explain things as if they are distributed in space. Now Husserl talking about this, that the distribution here is actually in time. Okay, rather than space. It would have very, very actually important consequences later on.